Hey everyone, welcome to And Awe Track the Future, and you're part of a very exciting time because this is the very first episode. So this show is all about music. It's all about songwriting, production, and other elements of music. And every single show, I'm gonna explain and teach you something new about either production or songwriting. Um, and so today I've brought with me a song that I produced, self-produced, wrote, and everything else that's involved in taking a song from an idea to the final distributed product. So I'm going to play that song for you, and then I'm going to open up a session, and I'm going to explain exactly how I built the song. So first, have a listen to the song.
Close my eyes, you're there by me. Now I stand alone. I'm longing for your company. Do you see me in your dreams? My human work of poetry. If you see me in your dreams, our hearts will beat in harmony. Let's make believe, let's make it real. I want you to be my man. It's a waking dream, if you just believe. I hope you understand. I see you in my sleep. We're dancing along the sweet moonbeams. Now I lie alone. Won't you lie down next to me? Let's make believe, let's make it real. I want you to be my man. It's a waking dream, if you just believe. I hope you understand. Look at the stars in the sky. You'll see that there's more than the sight. I will be yours if you'll be mine too. Look at the stars in the sky. You'll see that there's more than a sight. I will be yours if you'll be mine too. I hear you in my head. Your voice, it sounds so sweet to me. If you were here instead, you'll see how we are meant to be. Let's make believe, let's make it real. I want you to be my man. It's a waking dream, if you just believe. I hope you understand.
So there's the song. And now I'm going to explain all the different components of the song and how that song started from an idea to the finished product. So that song is actually a fairly simple melody. Just started with the melody, I see you in my dreams. And then, and once I came up with that melody, I started writing a chord progression around the melody. And I built out the melody and the lyrics and wrote piano chords to go behind those. So that was kind of the backbone of the song. It's just a vocal melody and piano chords. And then building around that and producing it is a whole nother game. So the first thing I'm going to show you is the very initial structure of the song, which literally is just a pad and a vocal. So you'll see here all these pads reflect chord progressions. These are piano chord progressions. And as you'll see here, if you look at the MIDI panel, you'll see the chords in MIDI. So right here we have a piano chord. It's a C, an E, and a G. And so that's a C major chord. And then it goes to F, which is F, A, and C, but the C is inverted so that there's more fluidity between the first bar and the second bar. So now we're just talking piano chords. So the piano chords will go straight through the piece. And I'm not going to go through every single chord, but just know that it's a song that's in C major and spaced around what are called triad chords. Triad chords, there's major chords and there's minor chords and there's some other chords, but this is just major and minor triads. And a triad is 3 notes within the scale of C major, and C major is all white notes. So that said, now let's dive a little bit into the production. So here the chords are mapped out using a synth. And everything's frozen right now because it's Ableton. And my computer it can't handle 8 million things at once. So when you're using a DOS, sometimes you have to freeze sections while you're working on other sections so your computer doesn't blow up. So when we go over here, we'll see the pad where I've structured all these chords, these piano chords. And you'll see it's actually a synth that the chords are playing through. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with virtual digital synths, but essentially when you play MIDI notes into your computer, piano notes, VST, a virtual synth, will play actual sound from it. So here I have a synth that's called Serum. And Serum is it's a synthesizer that allows you to combine sound sources. It emulates an analog synthesizer, which combines sound waves. I'm not going to get into the whole technical about that. I'll just suffice it to say that I'm using a sound that's called LD Lead 2. And so that is the sound that's coming out when I scroll through these chords. So you hear, the other thing that's giving the chords movement is what's called an arpeggiator, which is a feature in Ableton, and it triggers keys automatically. And if you have a chord, if you have 3 notes playing at the same time, the arpeggiator will bounce between the different notes. So I threw an arpeggiator on this particular chord progression to give the notes more movement and rhythm. So this is just the pad we're talking about. But then after that, I put on a delay, which gives that sound even more movement. Then we go into the compressor, and I used, within these compressors that I'm pointing to, I used a tactic called sidechaining. And if you produce EDM, you probably are familiar with that. So what it is you're triggering a volume switch over a certain sound when another sound comes in. So in this instance, I'm sidechaining the pad against the kick. And so what that means is that whenever the kick comes in, automatically the volume of the pad will go down a little bit. So what will happen, that's used in like dance music and pop music to make the 2 parts gel better together. and mesh together as a mix. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to freeze up this track again so that there's not distortion when I try to play through it, because this entire song is mostly in MIDI. And because it's in MIDI, it requires a lot of processing power to go through the virtual synths and to draw upon samples that are programmed in MIDI instruments like drum machines. It takes a lot of processing power, so that's why I have to freeze up tracks. So while this is freezing, I'll just show you a little more about, I used 2 compressors. One is being sidechained from the kick, and the other is being sidechained from the bass. So now that I've frozen that, I'm gonna solo just the kick and just the pad so that you can hear the sidechain in effect. I'm not sure how much audio comes through the platform, but essentially what's happening is that whenever the kick is playing, the pad will decrease a little bit so that the sound meshes together. So that's a little bit about sidechaining. And there's a lot more to that, but let's move on to the actual structure, all the different components of the song. So when you think about a rock band or a pop band, you have different players. You'll have, the drummer, you'll have the bassist, you'll have the guitar player, you'll have the keyboard player, you'll have the singer. And so when I make my tracks, I emulate a live band. And so instead of having a bassist, I'll program a bass part. Instead of having a drummer, I'll program kick, snare, clap, hi-hats, all the things that a live drummer would normally do. Instead of having a keyboard player, I'll program the pads. Guitar, I used samples because I'm not a guitar player, so I used some samples from Splice, have some background vocals, and some synths, and I also have a noise effect. So it's essentially like replicating a band within your DAW or your digital audio workstation. So then when we go ahead and look at the bass line, you'll see these notes have been mapped out in MIDI, and they're being played through Serum, which is a VST, and I have a second layer that's being played through Scarby bass, which is from the Native Instruments collection, and that's for a more acoustic sound. So what I did was I doubled the MIDI that I programmed. So when you look here at the bass line, you'll see it goes from C to F to D to A, G, and A. And that pretty much, it's not super creative. I'm pretty much going along what's called the root of the chord, which is sometimes a trick if you want to write a good bass line to a track. You can follow the root of the chord. The root of the chord is the first note that's used to build up the chord. So for example, a C major chord, the root would be a C. So C, E, G, the root would be C. So the first chord in this song is a C major chord. So naturally, it would be a good step to put the root note in the bass line. So you'll hear how the bass line works with the chords. So you hear like how the outline of the bass kind of vibes or traces the pads. So that's a little about the bass line. Then we're gonna move on to the drum programming. So A classic thing to do in dance or pop music is to do what's called a 4 on the floor kick. And a 4 on the floor kick is pretty much you put a kick on the first beat of each measure. So that would be, if you look at Ableton, that's 1, that's 1.2, that's 1.3, that's 1.4. Now I made it slightly more interesting by putting, by doing the 4 on the floor, but I also have a few extra kicks in here to give it more movement. So instead of boom, 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 you'll hear something slightly different in the kick. So that gives it more movement, more rhythm. And then with the snares, it's kind of an industry standard, which, you know, rules are made to be broken, but often what you'll do is you'll put a snare on the second and the fourth beat of measure. So it shows up here in Ableton as 1.2 and 1.4. So you hear that a lot in pop music. So I just did the second and the fourth of each measure, and I also did that for a clap as well. So you'll hear all three together, and you'll hear what that sounds like. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So then moving on to other parts of the drum kit, we have what are called closed hi-hats and open hi-hats. And those are modeled after an actual drum set. So you'll have a closed hi-hat is when the two plates of the two hi-hats of the drum are pushed together, and the drummer is hitting that with his stick. So what I use when I use a closed hi-hat are samples of that strike. And then an open hi-hat, by contrast, is when the hi-hats are clapped together when the drummer puts his foot on the pedal. So closed hi-hat and open hi-hat have a different feel. So you'll hear the closed hi-hat here, and then you'll hear the open hi-hat here. So you can hear a sonic difference between those two types of sound. Kind of an easy trick for open hi-hats is to put them on every off eighth beat. So that gives a sense of what's called syncopation, which is when something's off of the downbeat. So in this case, we have, if we divide this beat into eighths, we have it on the second eighth, the fourth eighth. Wait, let me get this right. If you divide this one beat here into 8 parts, this will be on the second eighth, the fourth eighth, the sixth eighth, and the last eighth. So it gives what's called a sense of syncopation. So you'll hear the syncopation when, for example, I put the pad on with the hi-hats, and then you'll hear, it's not on the downbeat, it's on offbeat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So it's on the and. So that's a trick for open hi-hats. Moving on, the crash is a good way to either start or end a song, or trigger a new part of a song. Because it's good in pop music or hip hop or whatever to section off your songs, or to use indicators to trigger when you're switching, say, from a verse to a chorus or so forth. So you'll hear the crash here. I think this might actually be a reverse crash. And that's something else that you can use. A reverse crash is when you just switch the sound waves so that it's opposite what it was before. And within Ableton, you can do that by just hitting R on the audio file. Anyway, so then you'll hear how this reverse crash sounds in the context of the entire song. So we've got the verse, and then all of a sudden we're preparing ourselves for the hook. So when you have this crash going, it builds into the hook. So then when the hook goes, it's more dramatic. Another trick that I use is sometimes before you go into a chorus, sometimes you can drop out parts of the instrumental to give more drama when the chorus goes. Because it's almost like a roller coaster. When you're at the top, you know there's suspense, and you know that something's going to happen. And so you can create that same sense of suspense by taking out parts of the instrumental. So if you think about verse going to chorus, you can hear it here. Like when I play the whole track, here's the verse, 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 verse. And then see how there's a drop? And then it goes into the chorus. So that's a trick you can use in the productions. Moving on, we have a tom, which is another drum that you can use that's pulled from sort of the traditional drum set. The toms are they're not the drum on the bottom, they're the small ones on the side. They're not cymbals. You'll hear it here. So this is another way to sort of build anticipation. So I added some toms there. Now let's get to my pad stack. So I was explaining before the chord progression and how to use the chord progression in pads. I like to stack my pads because it just gives a fuller sound. So if you see here, I duplicated the chord progression for this pad. I duplicated it into a second pad with a different VST. And then I have a third pad that is just to fill out the root notes more. So I took out the other notes in the chord and it's just the root notes. And I did it, I'm not sure how well the audio is streaming through, but I have this as kind of a lower part of the pad to fill out the track more, because it was sounding a little thin when I was first building out the track. So then when you combine these three pads, then you get kind of a full, so you have like a smoother pad, and then you have the arpeggiated pad that I was showing you before. So that's that. And then as I was building this track, sometimes what I like to do, after I finish the track, after I've done all the MIDI and stuff, I'd sometimes like to just hunt around for samples on Splice to see if there's anything that can add a little texture or a little rhythm. So I found this excellent guitar part, which I warped and manipulated, and that's a whole nother game. And I loaded that in to give more life to the track. So this is a guitar. I only look for samples that are within the key of the song that I'm writing. But if you're looking for samples, there's software that you can use to shift the key, so that even if you find something in another key, you can shift it to the key that you're writing the song in. So here we have the guitar sample, and then same guitar sample, and I used the second guitar sample here. And so you'll hear the first guitar sample is just kind of like a little bit of a syncopated funk thing. And then that's for the verse. And then for the chorus, we have a little bit more action going on with the guitar part. And I heard this, the way I chose this one and the way I chose how to manipulate the samples is that I heard them with the rest of the track, and I just said, okay, this works here. So within the context of the track, or the pads at least, you'll hear how the guitar goes with the pads and how they all make sense together. So, so you hear on the syncopation of the guitar. So that just gives it more adventure. And then when you go into the chorus, you'll hear how the guitar part goes with the pads. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they're in the same key. But also the guitar, in a way, serves as a lead over the pads, so it gives it a little more melodic interest. So then we go over here to I have a lead synth. And so this lead synth is just another thing to add to the verse and the chorus to give it more life. So this here, I have a very special, I do some tricks and I do some sound design to each part. So you'll see here I'm using Serum as the VST. I'm using Echo with an Ableton, which is pretty self-explanatory. I used what's called a transient shaper, which affects the attack and the release. I can go into more about what attack and release are. They affect the attack and the release of the sound, or of the instrument. So I use what's called a transient shaper, which will either increase the attack or decrease the attack, which means either it comes in more quickly or it comes in a little more slowly. That's a whole subject that I'm not going to get into right now. And then I used a feature in Ableton called Auto Pan. And panning is when you take parts of the audio and you put it in the left ear or the right ear. So this automatically will change the position of the instrument in your stereo, your geographical stereo sphere. So I use that to give this particular part more life, because it's not an extremely essential part like a vocal, so, or a bass line. So there's more liberty for it to go to dance around the track. So if you listen to this in context with the guitar and the pads, you'll see how the lead sort of flows around the guitar and the pads. So let's hear it. So you get the idea about that. So that's sort of this is kind of the equivalent of what a guitarist and a keyboard player would be doing in a live band. So then we get here to effects. So here I have a noise rise. I put this in the bridge. You'll hear the noise rise. Just kind of a slow build of noise. And this is similar to the reverse crash in that it builds suspense. So you know it's going to land into something. And in this case, it starts during the bridge and it lands in the verse. So, so we'll see if you listen to this in context, you'll see. So that's the noise rise, and you'll see that I didn't just leave it as is. I actually did what looks like a volume shift in Ableton, a volume envelope. Trying to find where I believe I know I wrote it somewhere, and you'll see that see how there's like two gradients of purple, and you'll see how it's not just one gradient like in Chords 5. It's two different colors. So the lighter shade of purple is where the volume is up, and the darker shade of purple is what's kind of had the decrease in volume. So this indicates a shift or an envelope going from low volume to high volume. So then as a whole, the song is almost, this track is like a backing band. So when you hear everything in context, you'll hear how it sounds almost like a band. It's almost like the Beatles. The other thing to note also is that this is in the production phase of making the song, and then the mixing phase is something completely different. So one thing that I haven't yet discussed is how to adjust levels of everything so that it's the most powerful track and everything meshes together the best. But that's for the mixing phase. So I'm already noticing here, for example, I don't think the kick is loud enough, and there's other things I have to adjust. But some of that goes towards the mixing phase. And here we're talking about production. So within the production, I also want to break down basic pop song structure, because there are all different types of song structures. There's EDM, there's classical, but then certain genres of music like pop and rock and hip hop and some commercial dance, they all follow a fairly similar structure, which is like 2.5 to 4 minutes. There's a verse, a chorus. The sort of basic elements of putting together a song are often you'll have an intro, you'll have a first verse, you'll have the chorus, you'll have a second verse, you'll have a second chorus, you'll have a bridge, you'll have a third verse, a chorus, and an outro. That's just one pretty common song arrangement. Now you'll notice here that verse 1 has 16 bars, but then verses 2 and 3 only have 8 bars. And the reason is this: the listener is probably going to start to get bored of hearing 16-bar verses throughout the song. They're going to want to jump to something new faster. So that's kind of another trick that you can use, is you start with a 16-bar verse, and then the 8-bar verse, you put 8-bar verses later in the song. So then you'll see that the chorus is also, each chorus is 8 bars, and choruses, typically replicate each other in terms of the lyrics, but they don't have to. So that's the basic structure of the song. Another thing I like to do is mess around with vocal samples. So here I took a vocal sample from Splice and I chopped it up. And so you'll see I put some auto-tune on it, even though I'm sure the singer didn't need it. I put some auto-tune on it, and then I like to use guitar effects. I use Native Instruments Guitar Rig, and I put on an effect called Cloud. It's a vocal effect. And then the track itself, the samples themselves, I warped them and chopped them up. And you probably already know what warping is, but if you don't, it's altering the timing of a sample, so that often it's done so that the sample is in time with the rest of the track. And often what someone will do is they'll take a sample that's at a certain BPM, like say, I don't know, 100 BPM. And then with an Ableton or whatever DAW they're using, they'll warp it so that it's at whatever BPM the track is at. So here you'll see, I don't remember whether or not I warped this. I think I did. I know I often do warp samples. I'm not sure if I warped this one. But anyway, that's warping. And you'll see that in addition to putting this sample in this part of the bridge, I put a second sample that's similar in the second half of the bridge. So you'll hear how it differs. I like to add and subtract things throughout a section in a song just to give it more interest. Not completely change it, but just add and subtract things so that it doesn't get too repetitive. So you'll hear, it just starts with one sample. So then but then the second half of the bridge has, it adds a second part. So then if you hear that in context of the part, you'll so it's very subtle, because I like all the elements to mesh together. I don't want one element that's going to be less stronger than the other, because ultimately when you hear the backing track, you want the vocals to be in part of the track. So everything else is good if it just kind of meshes together. So, that's all of that is a mouthful. There's so many elements to music production. I just kind of gave a short overview about how to build a track, a modern pop track based on common practices in music, and just some of the things that I use within the DAW and the VSTs to bring the track to life. So let's listen to the track one more time so that you can hear, now that I've explained all these elements, you can hear how everything meshes together.
I see you in my dreams. I close my eyes, you're there by me. Now I stand alone. I'm longing for your company. Do you see me in your dreams? My human work of poetry. If you see me in your dreams, our hearts will beat in harmony. Let's make believe, let's make it real. I want you to be my man. It's a waking dream, if you just believe. I hope you understand. I see you in my sleep. We're dancing along the sweet moonbeams. Now I lie alone. Won't you lie down next to me? Let's make believe, let's make it real. I want you to be my man. It's a waking dream, if you just believe. I hope you understand. Look at the stars in the sky. You'll see that there's more than the sight. I will be yours if you'll be mine too. Look at the stars in the sky.
And there you have it. So that was sort of an overview of building a track. This has been the first episode of Track the Future, where I talk about everything related to music, production, songwriting, and just about anything else. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope it's been informative. Feel free to ask me any questions over social media. I also market these beats online. If you ever need beats for, if you're a singer or a hip hop artist and you need beats, you can go to anaw.com, or you can find my beat store. So feel free to DM me if you have any questions. Thank you for tuning in, and rock on.